1. Race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 to 42.
Hi everyone, it's great to have you along for another edition of the podcast. I hope wherever you may be around the world, you're managing to stay in good spirits. With things changing on a weekly basis and at different rates around the world, it's really great to see people getting back on the water, enjoying time with family, out getting wet, enjoying the wind. And for those quieter moments, well, that's what we're here for. And this month, we've got an absolute treat in store. We'll come to that in a moment, but before we do, as always, thank you so much for all your feedback, for your support and your comments on the pod. If you do like what you're hearing, do please give us a like, leave a comment and let all your friends know you've been enjoying the podcast. It all helps so much here in podcast land. I've been busy over here in Cowes, taking the time to recharge a little, but also to try and set a few things in motion as we all move forward. And just like my 2 teenage kids, I've been online schooling. It's been great, and I'm not going to lie, it's been a challenge at times, but I've been brushing up on my navigation and chart reading with the ever so patient teacher at UKSA. I'm hoping I've picked up a few more podcast listeners from my online classmates. Guys, if you're listening, welcome to the pod. But I strongly recommend it. If you're messing about in boats and want to deepen your knowledge, maybe even just get a little refresher, then there's some great online resources available. It's been fun, trust me. So, who have we got lined up this week? Well, if you're listening to this, you're already going to know that joining me for this week's podcast is one of the most talented, most decorated, most successful sailors of not just his own generation, but of all time. In 2012, he became the most successful Olympic sailor ever, claiming a 4th Olympic gold medal at the London Games. And just 1 year later, was standing on the podium holding the America's Cup, having played a key role in that much discussed comeback win by Oracle Team USA out on the windy waters of San Francisco Bay. I am, of course, talking about British sailor Sir Ben Ainslie, who you may have most recently seen out on Sydney Harbour, where in his first ever SailGP event, he took out 4 from 5 fleet races and the winner takes all match race, putting on a dominant display in the superfast F50 catamaran. It was really great to see Ben back racing in Sydney. It was the venue that saw him win his first Olympic gold medal back in 2000. And we were Team GB teammates back then and racing out on the same courses. Ultimately, we both ended up on the top step of the podium, but Ben's medal win, his approach to the final race, was a real mark of his dogged, no compromise, attacking character. We talk through all of that and reflect on a whole lot more of Ben's Olympic sailing career in the first part. Before, in part 2 of the pod, looking more at Ben's relationship with the America's Cup and how well placed he sees himself and his team, Ineos Team UK, as this 36th America's Cup draws ever closer. We talked to Ben at the team base in Portsmouth. Social distancing, of course, but it was an exciting day. As we arrived, the crane was out and the stealthy, imposing matte black AC-75 was out front, and there was much activity. The team were preparing for their first day back out on the water after months of lockdown. He's a busy man, Ben, so before we get underway, I have to send him a massive thanks for being so generous with his time. Trying to win back the America's Cup brings with it a massive amount of pressure. So sitting down to chat for a couple of hours, well, it's really appreciated. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Sir Ben Ainslie.
Remember this moment because it's probably the best sailing moment you will ever get in your life. I remember the first time I went sailing in an Optimist, I just had a duffel coat and Wellington boots on. It sounds crazy now, but I wasn't sure I'd ever get the chance again to go to the Olympics.
Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast, Ben. We're here at your team base, obviously still social distancing our way through life, but it's great you can join us, Ben. It's no exaggeration to say that every week we get messages from listeners asking when you'll be on the podcast. So it really massive thanks for making it happen.
No, it's a pleasure, and no, it's been fun listening to the podcast you've been doing, and different stories, and yeah, really fascinating. So pleasure to be on the podcast.
I was going to ask you if you'd listened to any, if you actually sort of knew what you were in for.
I listened to a few and had some great people. Obviously, Perce is a great mate of mine, so I really enjoyed listening to his thoughts, and guys like Russell and Paul and Jimmy and so many people, so many different experiences across the sport, really. So yeah, it's been great.
We've enjoyed it too, actually getting to listen to people for a length of time. And Ben, we're here at the team base. It's a great spot. The Cup boat is back from Sardinia, actually just going in the water as we arrived today. Boat 2 is still being built. Schedule's a bit up in the air. I mean, not ideal in a Cup campaign, of course. We don't want to dwell on the virus scenario, but how has progress here been affected by the whole thing?
Well, obviously it's been difficult getting on the water. We haven't done that now for 3 months. Today is the first day back out, which is a big day for the team. That's been frustrating, but in pretty much every other area we've been able to continue, and progress has been really good. And as you know, we're very reliant on simulation now and development through the Cup, and our team have done a great job on that front. So that hasn't slowed down. And in fact, actually, it's probably intensified because we haven't had the distraction of being out on the water. And Jason Carrington and his team over at Carrington Boats in Hythe have done an amazing job to keep our second boat, our race boat, on track through this, and working through COVID practices and so on. So yeah, it's been hard, but I think that I'm really pleased with how the team's reacted to it and done the best we possibly can through that. And it's affected, it's affecting everybody, but in our own America's Cup world, it's affected the teams in different ways. You can't control that. You just got to do the best that you can in your own environment and try and make the right decisions and react to that. And thankfully, we've got a strong team here that are able to do that.
Oh, that's good news. Let's touch on your last outing racing a boat. It was a bit of a statement, wasn't it? A new team straight into the spotlight in Sydney Harbour, the opening round of the new SailGP season. And you absolutely bossed the fleet. I mean, how much fun was SailGP down in Sydney? I mean, you definitely looked, Ben, like you were in your happy place.
Yeah, well, it obviously helps when you're getting the results, but I do have to say it's one of the best sailing experience I've ever had. It was just brilliant. I went down there with the team, and I wasn't quite sure, because everything's so tightly regulated, I wasn't quite sure how frustrating it would be in terms of getting out in the water, the training time. But I was amazed, firstly how well run the whole thing was, from the shared boat resource, getting all the boats out in the water and so on, really smooth operation. And then we actually had tons of time out on the water. I think we were getting sort of 4 or 5 hours a day for a week building up to the event, which was way more than I expected we would. And we both sailed in Sydney loads, and it's just such a magical place to sail. And I think it was the second or third day out, and we actually had a good mate of mine, Chris Cecil Wright, was on the boat, on the back of the boat, as we're going back towards the Cockatoo Island where the boats were being kept. And we were going downwind towards the Opera House and the bridge, 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and just magical 45 knots of boat speed. And I turned around to Chris and I said, remember this moment, because it's probably the best sailing moment you will ever get in your life, because it was just perfect. And you sort of had to pinch yourself a little bit that you were there doing that. And I loved it. I just thought it was brilliant.
Oh, it's a special place. I mean, even watching you on the television, you could just tell that in many ways, I guess, a relief just to be racing and not have to deal with everything else.
Yeah, it was. It was great to be out there on the water, and the team were just amazing. You know, all of the guys had sailed last season in with different teams, but you know, to jump on a boat like that, and every guy in his position was, you know, almost faultless really, and we just gelled really well as a team. You know, the first day we went out training, it was pretty breezy actually, southerly, shifty, breezy, similar to actually the first day of racing. And we were quite sort of understandably cautious, you know, let's talk our way through a bear away and attack and a jibe and all the sort of basics. And within about 10 minutes, we were just throwing the thing around. And then Tom Slingsby and the Aussie guys came out, and we started racing against them, and we were neck and neck, and just having a mate. And Tom actually sent a message that evening saying, "Oh, I think that was awesome training," you know. And I just said, "Yeah, I totally blown away by the performance of the boats, and that we were out there throwing it around and racing toe to toe with those guys who obviously, you know, dominated the first season really, along with the Japanese team." So yeah, we were straight into it, and you know, had a fantastic team, and obviously things went really well.
Oh, it was good to see. Ben, we're going to go way back. I can remember the very first time I met you. You were standing in the queue for dinner at the Youth Nationals in Largs, Scotland, so up in my neck of the woods. There was this young, shy, gangly boy, I mean, 14 maximum, and you were already by then the talk of British sailing. That's Ben Ainslie, everyone was whispering. And then the next day I was out watching the racing, and you smashed your tiller extension to bits. I'm not sure why.
That sounds a bit more like it, yeah. Got through
I'm
a few
not
of
sure
those.
why, Ben, but you were fired up to win even back then. What was the young Ben Ainslie, the boy, what was he like?
Yeah, well, you're right. I was incredibly shy as a youngster. I'm not really sure why. But yeah, that was something that I was very, very shy. Took an age to go up and talk to anybody really. And but I had this somewhere, this sort of burning desire to be good at sailing, basically. It's something sport I always loved doing. My dad was a really keen sailor, but an ocean sailor. He wasn't a dinghy sailor, didn't really know anything about that. But I was really fortunate. When I was about 8 years old, my family moved to Cornwall. We lived in Cheshire, which for those not from the UK is in the middle of the country near Manchester. And we did a bit of sailing at the weekends in North Wales and so on, but we didn't get on the water that much. And then, as I say, we moved to Cornwall, and that's where sailing really took off for me, because we lived in a small fisherman's cottage on one of the creeks, Strongett Creek. And so I was able to just wheel my Optimist down to the beach and just go out sailing on my own. And it was sort of different times then. You could sort of do that without any coach boats or what have you. And I remember the first time I went sailing in an Optimist, and I just had a duffel coat and Wellington boots on. Then I had a life jacket, which is nuts. I mean, there's no way I'd let my daughter go out without any life jacket or anything like that. But that's just what you did in those days. And so I spent loads of time on the water, just really loved it. And then started racing and just loved the competition. And so, yeah, as I grew up, I was really, really determined to try and be good at sailing, very shy. And so I was a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde character, really, on and off the water. And as I've grown up, those two characters have sort of slowly merged, I think. So, yeah, that's sort of how it started.
Did you have an awareness at all that you were good at this?
Yes and no. I mean, I was good. I was really fortunate. The local club, Strongett Sailing Club, one of the parents was a really successful Firefly sailor called Phil Slater, and he had two kids similar age to me, and he really started the training at the club, and just in his spare time, he and his wife Julie, and then they drew in some of the other parents who would help out, and so we had the parrots, which were the beginners. We had the barracudas, which were the sort of intermediates, and then the aces, which were the top. So I started off as a parrot and worked my way through like everybody else, and then started doing well. There were quite a few other really good sailors that came out of that club. A guy called David Lenz, who races a lot, one of the top sailors here in the UK and top sail designer with North Sails now. So he and I had some amazing races. I mean, actually, probably some of the toughest racing that I've had in my career. Going up against people like Robert Scheidt, actually going up against David Lenz was probably tougher. And I think that was great, that competition at that age as youngsters coming through in our optimists. So we went from, having a few people who were top 10 in the country, maybe, to being the top club in the country. And so fantastic training ground. And I learned a lot through those years.
As a teenager, I mean, you weren't the only talent in the British camp back then, of course. I mean, recently spoke to Ian Percy on the podcast, and he talked about that golden era in the UK. So many youngsters went on to become big names in sailing, all from that generation. What do you remember about that time? And with a bit of hindsight, why did that happen? How much do you think did you all push each other to get better and better?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There was an amazing generation there. And I think mostly it stemmed, probably from Jim Saltonstall, I think, because he, when I look back and think about the youth training camps and sort of laugh about some of the things we were getting up to and all the rest of it and some of the coaching sessions. But
Jim Saltonstall, of course, he masterminded, the youth training scheme.
Yeah,
in the UK.
That's right. But I think what Jim sort of instilled in us more than anything was this belief that we could be successful. Because up until then, we'd had people like Rodney Patterson, who was a long time before, and Mike McIntyre, Bryn Vale, won the gold in Seoul in the Star. Laurie Smith, who was done amazing things in professional sailing and America's Cup, and I think won the bronze medal in '92. And then there was this sort of next generation, and we hadn't really been that successful in anything really for a while, I don't think. And Jim instilled in us this belief that we could go out and win world championships or go to the Olympic Games, and made us believe that was a possibility. And so I think that group you then saw, there was obviously some talent there, but that was nurtured by Jim and a lot of the other people, clubs around the country. I mentioned Phil Slater, but many volunteers that really helped support and develop clubs around the country. So if you put that talent and gave it the right support, then we were able to, you and I were involved in that, you were slightly before me with the Olympics, but coming into that, guys like Rod Carr, John Derbyshire, trying to set up the right foundations and support network and then funding, so that as that came together and we had the talent, it was just a magical recipe.
By 1995, you're only 18 years old and you're youth world champion, but also on a real trajectory, destination Atlanta for the Olympic Games of '96. Back then, I was also trying to qualify for the Games, and I set up camp that year in Weymouth. It was the venue for selection. Do you remember? I mean, as my memory is that, and it's not much of an exaggeration to say this, you were out sailing nearly every single day. I mean, the natural talent then was there, of course, and the determination, but that early success, it didn't just come from nowhere, did it? There was a lot of hard work went into that.
Yeah, no, there was, and I think that's right. In any sport, any walk of life, there are so many talented people. I do genuinely believe that the difference comes from hard work. But I remember you, actually, sort of slightly embarrassing, but for me, watching you and how you operated, particularly the '96 Olympics, the professionalism that you put into your campaign, that was a great example for me, and I think for a lot of others, of just that single-minded focus that you need to have. And John Merricks and Ian Walker as well. They were real high performers, great role models, and they helped me a lot as well. Guys I could look up to, great advice. And but it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't come for nothing. You've got to get out there. You've got to put the hours in. And it's the same in any walk of life, really.
I used to, open my curtains, and if it was raining, I'd think, oh God, maybe just the gym today. Then I'd see Ben Ainslie was out, and I've got to go.
And I trained with a great guy called Mark Littlejohn, who went on to be a fantastic coach. And he and I, we'd go out and we'd sort of go at it hammer and tongs for hours and hours. And those were great days. I look back to them, training through the middle of winter down in Weymouth, staying in some dodgy B&B where you had to put your 50p in the slot to get the heater to work, and running out of money and all those sorts of things that we did back then. It was great.
By the Olympic year, you'd made massive strides. You medalled at the Laser World and were already seen as a real contender. I mean, still so young, so much expectation. What's your memory of how you approached the Games in Atlanta? Did you think you could win, Ben?
Well, I was, as you say, it's on this massive trajectory of learning, and the results were getting better and better. I won the Europeans just before the Games and was third at the World Championships. But there was this guy called Robert Scheidt who was annoyingly good, that won pretty much everything. And I think all of us sort of had the expectation that Robert was the firm favourite going into those Games. And for me, it was just a matter of how quickly could I keep improving. And the one thing that I did have, and I was fortunate, and I know that you did as well, I was really quick downwind. And in any form of sailing, that's a massive tool to have in your weaponry, because if you mess up a start or you go the wrong way on the first beat, you've got some kind of an out. You can get yourself back to a respectable result, and then the races that you obviously get it right, you're up there in a strong position. So those Games, I remember I started terribly. The first race, I think it was in the 20s or something, and I was overheating. It was very hot and humid in Savannah. I was overheating, sort of probably blown away by the occasion, and I had to sort of settle my nerves a little bit between the races. I had a much better second race, although I got tangled up with the woman mark. There was a big pile up of boats, and a French guy called Guillaume Floron, who actually would go on to become somewhat of a nemesis, I would say, through my Olympic sailing career, put in a protest. Well, I didn't actually know at the time, but afterwards I saw on a notice board I was being protested. I couldn't really work out for what, because I hadn't really sort of managed to avoid everyone and stayed out of trouble. And anyway, I went to see him, and he said, "Oh, well, you made me tack onto port, and then I got hit by someone else, and that was all your fault because you didn't keep clear of me." What are you talking about? Anyway, so he put this protest in and told this story, which was an outright lie. And I was sitting there thinking, and as we all know, in protest rooms, it's there weren't really any witnesses, I don't think, at that time, and it all happened quite late. I think, how am I gonna deal with this? Because it's his word against mine, and he's protested, so I've kind of got to prove somehow that this didn't happen. Anyway, I think you remember that Marriott Hotel, which was the Olympic Village. They had, at the end of each day's racing, they put the big screen up and they showed the racing. And we were waiting as the jury was sort of deliberating. And thankfully, the race came up, and the first woman mark, and this incident, and exactly as I had said had happened. I'd come in we were both on port tack. Guillaume had got taken out by, I think it was the American guy, and they got tangled up, and I'd sort of tacked round and gone off. And so I said to the chairman of the jury, I don't really know, and I was only 19. I was a bit, inexperienced in terms of protests and how they work. I said, I don't know if this is right, to procedure, but I've just seen the incident on the TV. It'd be really helpful if you had a look at it. And he was a really nice guy, the chairman of the jury. I remember he's an elderly guy, and really one of those sort of guys that trying to do the right thing and supportive. And so he said, "Look, okay, leave it with me. We'll go and have a look." And then they came back and, of course, said, "Yeah, it's as you said it was, and we're just going to throw out the protest." But that unfortunately wasn't the end of my run-ins with Guillaume Floron as a sort of experience again, I think, in Athens a few years later.
I love that you remember all the detail of that.
Yeah.
24 years.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit scary.
So after those initial moments, you did actually put together a strong series. And for our listeners that won't maybe remember this, it went down to a final battle for gold between you and Brazil's Robert Scheidt. It was a rivalry that the sailing world would, of course, get used to seeing a lot. What happened in that last race? A fleet race, of course, before we went to medal races and all of that. Tell us what went on, Ben.
Yeah, so the deal was Robert had quite a good lead. With about 3 or 4 races to go, we were pretty much neck and neck. And then I remember the penultimate race, Robert had a really good one. I was maybe 8th or something like that. So he ended up with about an 8-point gap. And so, I mean, it was, I had a chance, of the gold, but an outside chance. And then Per Moberg from Norway was in third and a little bit about a similar distance behind me. And so going into the final race, I was just going for it to try and win the race and see if maybe Robert had a problem and maybe it would go my way. And we had quite a few false starts. I think the tide was pushing us over the line, and then it ended up with a black flag start. And I remember I was about 10 boats down from the committee boat. Robert was at the committee boat, and he went over the line quite clearly, probably with about 20 seconds to go. And I think he just took the decision, I'm done, it's obviously over the line. I'll just sheet in and go and see if I can convince as many boats to go with me, which was quite a smart move, really. And unfortunately, I was in that pack that, I knew I needed a good start. I needed a good race if I was going to win it. So I sort of got suckered into going with the group and unfortunately was over the line. So it's a bit of a anticlimactic way to end it all, really. And then to, make that, I remember Per came up to me after I'd been disqualified and said, "Oh, thanks very much. Now I can win the silver medal." Oh, that's a pretty sporting way to deal with it. Anyway, thankfully he didn't have such a good race, so he ended up with a bronze medal, and Robert obviously took the gold. Which I remember at the time I was kind of devastated because, as we all know in sailing, you don't necessarily get that many shots to go, especially here in the UK. We've got so many talented sailors, and just qualifying itself had been hard enough in '96. I wasn't sure if I would ever necessarily, sounds crazy now, but I wasn't sure I'd ever get the chance again to go to the Olympics. And I was a really good chance of winning the gold, and I'd sort of blown it. But so I got back to the dock, and all the teammates were there, and then I got to see my parents later on, and sort of realised actually it wasn't a bad shot, it wasn't a bad go at it, and hopefully I'll get another chance someday.
I always thought that Robert took you out in that final race.
No, he didn't. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about it, but no, he was clearly over the line and decided to try and take as many people with him, which I think was perfectly entitled to do, and probably pretty good move.
So you're 19 years old, you're standing on the podium for a nation that back then, hard to believe, but Team GB didn't win many medals. What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? Good question. I think I was trying to work out how I was going to get myself to the top of the podium rather than halfway up it. And the great thing, although Robert and I had many really tough races then and then in the 4 years building up to Sydney and including Sydney, those were amazing experiences, and from a sporting perspective, putting yourself up against the very best. And actually my development as a sailor and as an athlete was so much more advanced because of that competition with Robert. So whilst I probably would have won a hell of a lot more if he hadn't been around, I think it certainly made me a much better sailor. No, they were very memorable times.
How did that silver medal change your life? There weren't many medalists from the British team. We finished a lowly 36th in the medal table. When you got home, were things different?
Yes and no. I think as anyone who's done an Olympic campaign will tell you, there's this sort of moment of anticlimax when you finish in Olympics and you get, whether you've been successful or not, I think you get home and suddenly it's a realisation that there's not really anything there in terms of don't have to get up to go training. There's that not intense focus is gone. And that was quite a weird experience the first time I went through it. And actually I learned quite a lot from that to help me in my future Olympic experiences or campaigns. But coming home, no, I remember Steve Redgrave, they put him on This Is Your Life, and I didn't even met Steve Redgrave, and because I'd been one of the few medalists, I got invited along to go on the show. And I remember this hilarious moment where, for those that don't know the show, they have obviously Steve Redgrave, they go back through his life and bring on through the show people that family members or teammates or whatever. And so it came around to these sort of Olympic teammates, And they said, and you're a great mate from sailing, Ben Ainslie. And so off I came to the stage, and you can see Steve hadn't got a clue who I was, hadn't got the foggiest. And it was sort of a hilarious moment where I sort of shook his hand, and off I went. And I was, as we talked about, I was really rather shy. So I was in a terrible sort of state of, oh my God, he doesn't even know who I am, and I'm on this show, and this is terrible. And then thankfully, because a lot of people don't know, Steve Redgrave actually sailed for an America's Cup team back in '87 in Fremantle as a grinder. And one of his great mates was also a grinder who was on the show, and he was very nice, and obviously he realised I was a bit uncomfortable about the whole thing, so he came over and we were having this great chat about the Cup in '87 and so on. And so I got through the evening that way. So that was one of the few sort of TV appearances I did. And then the other thing actually I remember as a guy called Tim Hancock, who people know is one of the top race officers around, who was also a very, very good sailor. And I remember catching up with him, and he said to me something that was really interesting. He said, I think not winning the gold medal is probably the best thing. You won't think this, but I think it's probably the best thing that could have happened to you, because if you had, okay, you'd be getting all of this, you'd be the only other gold medalist along with Steve Redgrave and Matt Pinsent, all this attention, but actually you're so determined now to try and go out and win the gold medal next time that you're gonna, focus that much harder, train that much harder, rather than sort of if you win a gold medal at 19 and suddenly the whole world's at your feet, and it's quite easy to probably get lost and distracted and not focus on the sport you should be doing, which is quite an interesting comment. I mean, I didn't quite agree with him at the time, but maybe he was right.
Was that true? I mean, how determined were you to stand on the top step in Sydney?
Yeah, I mean, that was everything. Just the next 4 years, put every waking moment into trying to make that happen, which, as we talked about, was hard because Robert was such an amazing sailor and athlete, and so we had incredibly intense rivalry, incredibly intense, and I think we actually liked each. Certainly from my side, there was a lot of huge amount of respect, but when we were out on the racetrack, it was no holds barred. It was full on, and we had our moments. But like I said, we look back to some of the races that we had. I remember one race in the World Championships in Chile, and it was a windy venue, and Robert was very, very good in the stronger winds. And I got in front in this race. I didn't have the best of series, but I'd managed to get in front in this race, and he had a slight edge over me upwind. He's quite a tall guy, so he had more leverage, incredibly fit, great technique. He's just ever so slightly quicker upwind. And remember, we got out, managed to get him out all the way out to the port hand ley line and tack and cover. And those days were on much longer courses. So we probably spent about 20 minutes on port tack, neck and neck back into the finish. I've never hiked so hard in my whole life. I remember crossing the line, absolutely knackered, and we had that sort of, and actually on that race, I think it maybe was the penultimate race, on that race, him finishing second meant he won the world. So I remember we had that sort of acknowledgement of it was a great race, and he'd obviously had won that particular battle, but he won the war in that World Championships. But yeah, just amazing rivalry. It's great. He was saying something, but whenever we had our little moments, he'd always be shouting at me in Portuguese. The most stupid thing you could have done at that point was wind me up, because I was just livid. It's a bit of a sort of rolling the dice moments, but eventually it got to the point where he was ahead.
So at the Sydney Games, at the Millennium Games, in the wonderful Sydney Harbour, the whole British team was fueled with real resources, I guess, for the first time. And there was a real confidence, wasn't there? There was you, Percy, Ian Walker, Billy Barker, me, of course, all riding a kind of new wave of confidence. There was a huge expectation that we'd all deliver. What was it like for you in Team GB at that time?
Yeah, you're right. It was a brilliant squad, fantastic squad. When you look back at, you mentioned a lot of the characters there, huge amount of talent, great support from John as the team manager. I think the thing all of us felt with Sydney, though, was just such a difficult place to sail, and we'd all invested so much time being there to try and learn the nuances of the harbour, and I think obviously we did a good job of that, but still, pretty random place to sail. and that was quite scary when you've sort of invested that much time and effort into something. And certainly there were moments in that competition where it was a bit of, roll the dice and not really sure how this is going to play out in terms of the strategy of the race course. So yeah, it was I remember that was probably the most intense period I've had in my life, actually, I think, because of getting the silver medal in '96, being so focused on getting the gold, but not only having to go up against Robert, but also the venue of Sydney. Nothing was a given there. So it was very, very intense. I remember that. It was a pretty stressful time. I didn't actually, it was probably the one time in my career I haven't actually really enjoyed sailing that much. And most of the time, pretty much all the time, I love being on the water, but that period in the build-up and that competition wasn't that much fun because it was just so. I remember just being so stressed about the competition and trying to get the gold medal.
There's so many variables, weren't we? We were sailing in September, which the spring weather.
Yeah.
I think we were on the same course, and I think did we have 3 or 4 courses with all the variables of the compass? It was so hard to kind of lock down the variables.
It's a minefield. Yeah, it really was. Yeah.
Well, by the final race in Sydney, Ben, it was another battle between you and Robert Scheidt, but this time with some complicated maths. I had to take a quick look back at this race on the actual day. I had a bit on myself to actually watch your race. So didn't have all the details to memory, but it's a real testament to your approach, I think. You had a choice, didn't you, to try and win the race and hope that Scheidt was 9th or worse, and you take gold, or you could take it on, control him, and make sure he was 21st or worse when the discards kicked in. You take gold that way. Talk us through the choices you made and your memories of that afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I had a bit of a game plan going out. The 2 races on that final day was, I guess pretty obvious. See how the first race goes, and then, if got a bit of a points lead, work out how to defend that. But if things didn't go that well, then there was always an option of trying to use the discard and try and get those points back that way. And so the first race of the day, the penultimate race of the series, didn't go that well for me. Robert had a great race. I think he won it, or was first or second, and I knew that if he won it, I needed to be, I think, 9th or something like that to still be in the game, And at one point I wasn't, and it wasn't until the final downwind that I managed to just scrape in enough to.
We're in Portsmouth, there's a bit of traffic.
yeah. Off go the Navy, bless them. Yeah, so just scrape in to give myself a chance, and then after the race. Before that final race, spent quite a bit of time with John Derbyshire, my coach, chatting about the options. And John, it was funny because John, a lovely guy, great coach, very sort of placid person, I suppose, very calm. And I remember him saying to me, well, look, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to really do a proper job, there's no halfway, you're going to have to really go for it. Which was kind of really unlike John. And I remember thinking, well, actually, if John's giving me that advice, I really am going to have to go for it. And you're kind of right, because you're going, one of the most talented guys to ever set foot in a boat, in my opinion. And you've got to try and get him outside the top 20. It's, massive ask. But the breeze was blowing out of the west, on over Point Piper there, Bradley's Head. Really, really random, super random. And just to my mind, going out trying to win the race, that really was rolling the dice. Whereas actually doing what I did, at least had some chance to try and control the situation. And so went into it. The first start, I don't think Robert was necessarily expecting it, or expecting me to sort of come after him so intensely. And I remember, I think I got him into outside the ley line for the pin end, and actually was locked out from starting. but the race was postponed or was recalled, I can't remember which. And so I remember being really frustrated because I managed to get a jump on him, but now he knew what my game plan was. And so we came into the actual eventual start, and I left it until really, really late and managed to come in and get a hook on him and push him up head to wind, and then bear away and sort of as the gun went, he was sort of, you know, high and slow and had a really bad start. And actually, I think we'd even had contact, so he went off and did some turns, and then I remember thinking, oh, actually, that's not enough. I'm gonna have to stop here, which seemed crazy. It's the sort of first time I'd ever really done that in a race. So I started doing turns to sort of stay with him, and then we were right at the back of the pack, obviously, by that point. And then we had this amazing first beat. We would have done, I think, 20, 30 odd tacks. Bang, 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 bang. Remember one tack, caught the toe strap with my big toenail only, was so close to throw myself out of the boat. I was like, oh, you know, right on the knife edge. And then we got to the top mark, and I managed to, I'd done a little bit of team racing with bits and pieces, and I'd always loved the match racing game and watched the America's Cups. And so I managed to sort of set up this trap whereby Robert couldn't tack for the mark. And then we did a jibe round, and then eventually he just got frustrated and jibed into me and actually sort of ran me out of the way and sailed off. And actually, to his credit, I mean, phenomenal comeback. He got himself back to, I think, 22nd, 23rd, which given, I mean, by this, you know, the leaders were already around the leeward mark and we still hadn't gone around the windward mark. So how on earth he got himself back there, God only knows, but he did. But he didn't make enough places back. Then we'd had this incident. He was really upset about it. He felt that it was unfair that I tried to take him out of the race. So he protested me. I protested him for the collision that we'd had. And then we had quite a long wait with the jury, a couple of hours where we went through it all. And in the end, they decided, look, you know, it's kind of, no, Ben didn't break any rules here. You might not like it, but that's within the rules, and actually, you know, this collision, sorry, but you're in the wrong, so we're going to disqualify you from the race. So, I mean, I totally understand why Robert was upset, you know, because he had a gold medal there and that got taken away. And, you know, I think his view was it wasn't a clean race. And my view was, well, yeah, but this has happened before, and, you know, if you can actually get into someone and within the rules, and that's not an easy thing to do, then that's the game, in my view. And yeah, there's quite a lot of controversy about it at the time. But I think now... You got a bit of
stick, didn't you, from Roger Bannister?
Roger Bannister,
called
yeah.
You unsporting.
Yeah, I know, and I remember, because he's a hero in England, obviously, you know, first guy to break 4-minute mile. And I remember thinking, well, yeah, but you have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to sailing and the sport and the rules and all the rest of it. But you know, the same, I could understand it. But you know, I think it's interesting how the sport's developed now. We had the medal race, and that is trying to actually instigate these battles between the medalists. So yeah, I think it was a little bit ahead of its time, but.
The footage, Ben, I don't know if you've watched it recently, I suspect not.
No.
But the footage is great. I mean, in the race before, you see Scheid crossing the line. He did a better race than you, and he's pumping the air like he's already won his gold medal.
Yeah.
Then in that final race, particularly at the top mark, you're totally schooling him. I mean, listeners, if you get on YouTube, do take a look. Honestly, it's a great watch. What was going on at that time, and what was Robert saying? It must have been so desperately frustrating for him.
Yeah, he was saying something, but whenever we had our little moments, which we had quite a few in our races, where we'd start sort of shouting at each other, he'd always be shouting at me in Portuguese, so I had absolutely no idea what he was saying. Yeah, I mean, he was obviously frustrated, and he was trying desperately to try and get out of the situation. And then, like I say, it was actually pretty phenomenal that he managed to get back where he did, to be honest. And I remember him going, and then I just kind of, I just did the course, and I was watching him. he'd got ahead, he got a gust downwind, and he just got away from me. And I remember just watching his race, thinking, is he going to do it? What has he got to now? And then some people, I remember there's a guy, Stanley Tan from Singapore, he's a lovely guy. And he was, I think the next guy Robert had to get past and I remember sort of screaming, go Stanley, you know, trying to make sure he could hold off Robert downwind, which to his credit he did, and that was quite amazing because Robert was electric downwind, but for some reason he couldn't get past Stanley Tan, and that was the difference.
Stanley Tang saved the day.
But it's amazing, isn't it? And I'm sure you're the same for you when you look back at your career and all the other people you've spoken to. The differences, when you think back, are tiny between winning or not, and it's quite scary at times. You think how easily things could have turned out differently.
Well, there's plenty more to talk about, Ben, obviously, but whilst we're still in Sydney looking back at it, firstly that decision to be the aggressor, to take it on, then of course the execution, absolutely bossing a man who at the time was one of the sport's real stars, still is. I mean, that gold medal, with everything else you've achieved since, that must still be a big highlight.
Yeah, definitely. It's, I remember that at the time it was just relief, really. I think you speak to a lot of people that, you know, particularly with the Olympics, because there's this intense 4 years, actually just getting the job done. I think relief is your initial feeling. And then there's sort of the great moments of sharing it with family and friends and teammates. And we had such a great team there, like you said, that we were able to share in that moment. I remember the big difference being, we talked about it before, the podium, and then you get, you know, this little, as you know, you get this little extra step in the Olympics podium anyway. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is a difference. I've made made it for the extra step. It's a kind of bizarre thing to be thinking about as you're going onto the podium. But anyway, it's a magical moment by the Opera House and like I say, with your teammates and everything. Really, really very fond memories.
Well, we're going to stick with the Olympics for a while, but there's been quite a few. So we're going to jump forward a bit and I'm going to highlight them here. So you switched to the fin for Athens and then Beijing, 2 more gold medals, just like that. And then in 2012, it was the big one. My first question, I guess, I mean, many athletes go for a lifetime without competing at a home games. Can you remember the announcement? Can you remember how you felt when Britain was given the 2012 games? I can imagine, Ben, it's either a massive excitement or a feeling of dread with all that added unwelcome distractions.
Well, no, I remember exactly where I was. It's sort of one of those moments you don't forget, isn't it? I was in Trafalgar Square. I was helping out in a small way with the bid, and I'd been asked to go to Trafalgar Square for the announcement. And at that time, I was sort of umming and ahhing whether to stay in Olympic sailing, because I was working with Keith Mills and Team Origin. Obviously, the Cup had been a big focus. I'd been with Team New Zealand, and really wanted to try and make my way in that side of the sport. And so I was there in Trafalgar Square. It was a bit of a shock announcement because it was really close with Paris, wasn't it, as to who was going to get it. And I remember just the atmosphere was electric. Trafalgar Square just took off, unbelievable atmosphere. And at that moment, I just thought to myself, I've got to be involved, but somehow I've got to be involved with this. Even if I'm not racing, I've got to try and be involved because it's going to be such an amazing event. And so that's when I started trying to work out how I could get back in and get back into the fin and start putting a campaign together. So it was a big moment.
We have to ask, Ben, I mean, the build-up didn't quite go to plan, did it? I mean, at the time, you were under real selection pressure, weren't you, from your current teammate, Giles Scott. Giles was banging hard on the door of the selectors. And there was the incident with the camera boat at the Worlds in Perth. I mean, how was your build-up to those games?
I would actually, they were quite good. I mean, we had just qualifying that was a serious challenge because I've been out of the fin for a couple of years. Giles and a few of the other younger guys had come through, Giles in particular, sailing really well, really good technique, really learning to race well. So I knew it was going to be a pretty intense battle just to get that spot. And the trials in Weymouth, it was the Sail for Gold Regatta in Weymouth in 2011. So I'd been back in the boat then for about 10 months. My first event back in the boat was in Perth, and it was just a shambles. I remember I was all over the place, and it was quite windy. I hadn't put enough weight back on, hadn't got my sailing fitness back. I was way off the pace. I remember I went around one leeward mark and just made a complete hash of it, fell over in my boat, almost capsized. I was sort of arse over to it, and remember some little laser radial kid who was watching, I guess his race was postponed or something, just pissing himself in laughter, and I was just so embarrassed. I was like, there's this kid looking at me, and he probably thinks, who the hell's that guy? He's a complete numpty, So I knew I had a bit on to catch up with Giles and the other boys. I mean, thankfully, Sid, David Howlett, who was my coach for most of my fin career, was amazing in terms of helping me get back on the pace with the kit and so on. And so I knew I had good kit, and it was a case of sort of getting the sailing fitness back and so on. But that sail for Gold Regatta 2011 was a big one, a big career-wise. It was a massive event, and I managed to win it, and then get the nod for the pre-Olympics and win that, and then that sort of was the sort of selection done. But then, unfortunately, I started. We had the Worlds in Perth that you mentioned. I had a slight run-in with someone who got in the way. Which is another been many embarrassing moments in my career. That was one of them, and. Yeah, that was a bit of a distraction because there were some people in the sport who were trying to, I think, use it as a bit of an opportunity to make life difficult. And I had to have a hearing, with World Sailing, or ISAF as it was then. And I lost the World Championships as well, which is pretty frustrating after sailing a pretty good week. So getting through that, and then unfortunately through that as well, I managed to, I've always sort of suffered with my lower back. And through those championships, I realised I was starting to get pain down my left side, and getting back, it was getting worse through the competition. Then getting back home, going to see the specialist, and realising that actually getting trapped nerve, and I needed to actually go through a procedure to free that up. And so that was a really worrying time, because I knew I was going to have surgery. I was going to knock my fitness, knock my sailing time. Then I had this added pressure of this hearing about my run-in in Perth. So yeah, it was a pretty stressful time actually then. And the surgery went well, and I got back pretty well, but I really struggled to get enough weight back on, and for whatever reason, my body sort of felt like it was breaking down. So I went into the games, and I was having injection in my ankles because they were cramping up. My back was so I was really sort of patched together and not in great shape. So it was that was probably the toughest Olympics I've done, I think, because I didn't feel in great shape. It was a breezy summer down in Weymouth, and that's never, all the boats I've sailed, we talked about it earlier, I've sort of always set myself up to be quick downwind. That was just a strategy I took, because I felt that gave you a huge chance to have that downwind speed, gave you the chance to come back. And so I was light for the boat anyway, and then if I didn't have the fitness in the strong breezes that we saw, I was struggling. And Jonas Christensen and PJ Postma in particular really got their act together. They did some good work, I think, with their rig and sails through the summer. They were both big guys, and they definitely had a lick of pace on the upwind, and it was very, very difficult. I'd had to sort of muster every ounce of energy and determination and every trick in the book really to come out on top in that one.
Tim and I were out in the Rib for the BBC, so we lived every one of those races out in the bay in Weymouth. I don't think my back had recovered either, Ben. And there was a real battle, wasn't there, between Jonas Christensen and Peter Postma. I mean, in some ways, it felt like they'd decided that beating up on Ben Ainslie needed to be a team affair. How tough was that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was that one incident where we were all together, and I went around it, and it was, to be fair, it was pretty close. But when we all know when you've hit a mark, And they all said, "Oh, you hit it." And I was like, "Come on, guys, it's a bit of a soft one, And anyway, I had to do the turn because it was, I couldn't risk going into a protest with two against one and witnesses and so on. But I remember it massively fired me up, and it's kind of what I needed. And I remember saying them when I came in, sort of they made a mistake, and they did. I mean, that was the most stupid thing you could have done at that point, was wind me up, because I was just livid. And as I said, I was really struggling for energy and fitness. But sometimes you need something like that to just make you go that extra mile, extra bit of effort to try and get back. So that was a big turning point, actually. They helped me out inadvertently.
They made you angry. That was the quote of the day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Don't make me angry.
Yeah. Another great comment.
And then, Ben, the medal race, the final day. We were watching again from the rib. We'd just been watching Ian Percy and Bart just miss out on that gold medal. It was so heartbreaking. Really, and then it was your turn. And I remember feeling so nervous for you. It was the middle Saturday, Super Saturday it was being called. In London, Jess Ennis, Mo Farah, Team GB were on a real roll. And you were carrying the weight of the nation down in Weymouth. What are your memories of that medal race?
Well, firstly, as you said, Percy and Bart, I mean, that was just, I can believe that, watching that race unfold, because they'd done such a good job. And it all looked sort of in the bag, and they'd sailed amazingly through the whole series. Problem, there's only, I think, 10 boats in the fleet, so although they won most of the races, I think probably 50% of the races, couldn't actually get that much of a points jump on anyone. And then that race, that final downwind, we all knew that race course was really patchy and tricky, and they just got caught out in a bit of a hole, and Freddie had sailed a great race, I was just sort of gobsmacked, really, looking at that. That's, really, two great mates, and so I was really, genuinely was upset for those guys. And but then very quickly I had to sort of try and just get on with my own race. I had enough to sort of deal with. I remember I went out with the heavy air sail, or not heavy air sail, but the crossover was about 10 knots, and it was actually lighter than I thought, so I had to change sails. So I remember I was a bit frustrated about that, and then had to get into the race. But it's always been something I've always loved about the intensity of races like that. That it's kind of all on the line, and it's a bit, it's a bit crazy. But those pressure moments, I think, kind of why you do sport, right? Why you train, because that's when it gets exciting. And so that was as big as they come, really. Sort of winner takes all, well, not winner take, but whoever beat who. And of course, PJ was there in the background, had a chance, sniff at it if as happened, Jonas and I were right at the back of the fleet. And I remember Jonas did a good job defending in the pre-start, a little bit like 2000 actually. I was coming in for a late manoeuvre right on the gun, and then PJ, I think, inadvertently tacked over, and that completely scuppered things for me. And then I was actually a bit screwed. And Jonas had a slightly better start. And I remember tacking away, and that course that day was really tough strategically, because it was sort of a really light sea breeze. There was a bit of a wind bend around the North Head, and then out to sea, the breeze trying to flick round a bit more to the south. And again, it was a bit of a sort of rolling the dice moments, and I didn't really want to split from Jonas because I wasn't that confident which side was going to pay. So I sort of tried to stay with him, but obviously get the shifts that we had up the middle. I think we went pretty much at the middle of the track on the shifts. Got it slightly better than he did, and got ahead, and then had a really nice run. It was free pumping, light air free pumping, so right on that 10 knot limit, and I was quite good at that. And so I managed to get myself through away from the pack into second, and a nice little lead, and I thought, this is okay. And then I was no way I was going to split from Jonas, because I still wasn't that confident in what the breeze was doing. And I had this incredibly frustrating scenario where he went round the opposite gate mark, which was kind of fine. I tacked away, and we did this really long port tack, and actually I talked about there was a little wind bend around the North Head, which he was getting and I wasn't, so it was just slowly closing the gauge, and I wasn't gaining any bearing, so I was constantly losing. And meanwhile, I could see that the breeze was coming in out to sea round from the south, but there was no way I was going to split, and I was constantly losing. but eventually it got to the point where he was ahead. So at that point, I had to either stick with him and accept that he was going to be ahead, but try and find some way to pass him, or tack away. And I remember it's most bizarre, moment where you just think, "Wow, I've now don't have control over this," and it's kind of it's kind of in God's hands a little bit. So I tacked off, and came back again, found a nice little puff, as the breeze was coming around to the left, and still managed to stay ahead, just ahead. And meanwhile, PJ had gone out hard to the left, like he rang the bell big time, and that came good for him, and he got himself up to third, I think, third or fourth. And the final run in, and I remember he had an incident. Really, who knows? But he went for the gold, trying to get past Dan Slater, who's a guy who I'd first raced against in 1993 in New Zealand when we were teenagers in the laser radials, and we became good mates for all of those years, and sailing different boats, lasers and fins and what have you. And Dan, I think he was racing for 6th or 7th. He said, "Well, no, I'm going to defend the position," which he did well. And they had a collision. PJ got a penalty, and that was that. But yeah, couldn't have been any closer. That's for sure.
Oh, goodness, I'm like holding my breath as you're recounting that. I mean, do you remember the celebrations, Ben? I mean, I remember the scene so well. We were filming from behind you. You were in your boat, draped in the Union Jack, hands aloft, the fans on the nose, the grandstand area. They then broke out into Rule Britannia. I mean, it felt like such an amazing occasion, a defining moment in such a successful career.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing, I think can't really beat that, can you? In home games and being able to get a 4th gold medal in front of a home crowd, it was incredibly special moment. Again, massive relief, I think, was the overriding emotion. And then this, I was still, talked about Ian and Bart, and that was a massive disappointment. And so I was in this, I was obviously really, delighted to have won, but also trying to, I didn't want to, this sort of, in effect, rubbing salt into the wound. So I was just trying to be really diplomatic with those guys. I could see how devastated they were. And as a mate, just sort of trying to actually do the right thing, and so that was really actually difficult. That was really difficult, trying to manage that. But I remember we all got to the putt eventually, after lots of shenanigans, having to do the media, and then we had a team event. We finally got to the pub down on the front, and all of our families and teammates and mates were there, and we had an amazing session. And because when you're in those environments, Olympics environments, you kind of locked off from the rest of the world a little bit. So to actually see family and friends and celebrate was very special.
And that was that. And Olympics has passed since Rio, of course. By then, your attention already elsewhere. But looking back on your Olympic sailing now, what was your approach? What was different about your campaigns, Ben, that made you so successful?
Well, I think we sort of talked about the work ethic, the focus. Those are all things that all of the top players had. Some more than others. I mean, there are a lot of really talented guys I've seen in the sport who didn't really have the application, I think. So that work ethic being number one. I was really fortunate in the fin that we talked about Sid, David Howlett, because he's super smart guy, a great sailor, but super smart technically. So it was really a sort of marriage made in heaven in terms of him being able to help on the technical side with the kit. And so actually the first year I got into the fin, within 2 or 3 months of sailing the boat, I'd managed to win the Europeans and World Championship. And that was purely because, he knew he knew the kit, he knew the gear, he knew what sort of setup would work for me. And I was able to get into the boat, make a few fine tunes and be on the pace straight away, and then managed to sail well. And so he was a huge part of it, really. And I remember probably the best thing coaching advice Sid ever gave me was, we said, we started out, said, look, obviously done well in lasers and the Olympics and so on, but he said, I think the goal should be, because we all know sailing's got this sort of randomness in it, your goal really should be that you're good enough that if you have a bad week, you're still in the game, you can still win. And so we sort of made that pact, really, and that's what we worked towards, and we got to that point, and I think 2012 was a good example of that, where really I didn't have a great week. I wasn't feeling that great. I didn't really sail all of that well, but I managed to just about keep myself in the game to have a chance. And so that was a great bit of advice that I took with me and still use a lot. It's a good bit of experience there from old Sid.
I think your approach, Ben, was a bit different to mine. I mean, I like to work hard, I like to sail a lot, but I like to stack the odds. So I generally wanted to be just faster. I know all sailors want to be faster than everyone else, but I worked really hard to achieve that. But it felt, when I watched you race, you brought something extra. Like when it got really difficult, when you needed, I don't know, that sort of controlled aggression, you could bring that on top. I mean, the number of times I watched you race where you were, 21st at the first mark and finished 6th. I mean, you need something special to deliver that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked that element of being up against it. The tougher the challenge, almost the more exciting it is. Again, it's a bit of a strange approach. I mean, you really shouldn't be looking to make life hard for yourself, but I've certainly been a few occasions where I've managed to do that. And then had that challenge and sort of taken it on and found that rewarding in some kind of perverse way. But I just love that challenge. And yeah, again, we talk about it a lot. This downwind speed it was a massive thing for me, because I could be in the 20s at the mark and be 5th by the bottom mark in some amazing downwinds, and that was always a great tool to have. I think, again, that something about sport which I really like, and I really enjoy those moments where you have to perform and it's all on the line, you've got to sort of make it happen. I really find those moments rewarding. They haven't always worked out, but more often than not, thankfully, they seem to have.
And as the most successful Olympic sailor of all time, you're obviously more than qualified to have an opinion on this. How do you think Olympic sailing is looking currently? How healthy is it looking as a sport?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some big concerns about world sailing. I don't know any of the people there really, so this isn't a criticism of any individuals. I just think the sport really needs strong leadership at the moment. You've got some fantastic assets there, like the America's Cup. I think what Russell Coutts and Larry Ellison have done with CLGP has huge potential. There's offshore racing, and I think that needs some coordination. What used to be the Whitbread and Volvo race now, and where that goes. And then, of course, at the Olympic level, the class selection is has been a complete mess for as long as you and I have been involved, frankly. And then the grassroots level, how do you get more youngsters into the sport around the world? So I think it really does need strong leadership. I was super pleased to hear that Dave Graham has been put in as a new CEO there. I think he's a great guy, done an amazing job with Oman Sail over the years, and I'm sure can really do a lot, particularly in getting more youngsters grassroots level into the sport. But it does need help. The Olympic classes is an obvious one, and then with these big events that you've got, how can we consolidate so that you've got your Olympics, you've got your CLGP, America's Cup, around the world race, whatever that might be, and get the top guys in the sport competing. Your Pete Burlings, the top younger sailors coming through, and I think frankly need more support from World Sailing, the governing body, to promote the sport and promote these athletes. A lot of other sports do a much, much better job of that. And I think that's something, maybe because in sailing before professionalism, really only came about in the 90s, 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And it's quite a conservative sport, but I think it's really missed an opportunity in terms of promoting its. And I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about the next, the Pete Burlings and younger than that, promoting those sailors and really obviously helping them, but more importantly, helping grow the sport. So I'd like to see much more effort from that. I hope Dave, wish him all the best with that role. Hopefully he can, I'm sure he will do a good job.
There we have it, podcast listeners, the Olympic sailing career of Sir Ben Ainslie, the most successful Olympic sailor of all time. An inspiring listen, I hope you agree. And I meant what I said. If you're at all into small boat racing, get on YouTube and search Ben Ainslie, Robert Scheid, Sydney. There's a Brazilian post on there with fantastic BBC commentary from my great friends Richard Simmons and Hugh Stiles. It's a bit odd as you'll have to jump forward to about 4 minutes, but make the effort. It's incredible watching Ben, his confidence with a gold medal at stake. Well, maybe don't try it once you get back out on the water for summer racing, but it's well worth the watch. There is still much to enjoy, everyone. Part 2 is already available online. In it, Ben and I talk about his early days in the America's Cup. We discuss how San Francisco 2013 went down from Ben's perspective, how he went from Jimmy Spittle's sparring partner to afterguard tactician with a famous defeat looming. That's a fascinating story in itself. And finally, of course, we discuss how things sit now as Ben and the team prepare for their next challenge in Auckland 2021. As ever, please do let me know what you think about the podcast at Shirley Sail on Instagram and Twitter, just me on Facebook. And please do remember to like, review and subscribe on whatever platform you're joining us on. It'd be great to know your thoughts on Ben's stories and to know how you've enjoyed any of the other podcasts available online. As ever, you've been listening to the expert work of Tim at Vertigo Films, who lovingly produces this podcast. Many thanks, Tim. You're a star. And a quick thanks to photographer friend Rick Tomlinson. Rick kindly dug out some shots of Ben from London 2012 that you may have seen on my social media channels. Rick, many thanks for letting us use those. And a quick thank you also to SailGP for letting us use some footage of Ben in Sydney to help promote this edition. Until next time, thank you so much for listening and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
2 dives here, boys.
We're looking at 10.5 to 42.
This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.